I'm Michelle Robson, editor of Turning Left for Less, and I'd like to welcome you to the first ever episode of This Week in Travel. Almost every week we'll be bringing you the latest travel news, the best offers, reviews, and how to travel in luxury for less. I thought I'd start by telling you a little bit about myself. I've been working in the travel industry for nearly 30 years. I know I don't look that old. And many of those years I spent working in air traffic control, but I've always loved traveling. And particularly, I don't like slumming it. I like to travel in luxury, but I don't actually want to pay for it. I'd like to travel for free if I could, or, at least get a really good bargain. So a lot about Turning Left for Less is how to get free travel or cheap travel, and how to get value for money, more importantly, out of your travel. This week, we're doing a celebrity special to kick off in style, and we'll be looking specifically at 2023. Our first guest is Jonathan Samuels, who's a Sky TV news reporter. He's got a long history of news reporting, including working for the BBC, and has travelled extensively during that time. In his private life, he's also a keen traveller with a side hustle of travel writing. So he's the perfect person to ask about his plans for 2023 and how he views that travel is going to hopefully improve next year. So welcome, Jonathan. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much. I think the biggest news in travel for 2023 is this new show, isn't it? This is what's going to get everyone talking.
Absolutely. It's been a long time coming, but hopefully we'll be covering all the big stories this year.
Great. Excellent.
So Jonathan has a wealth of stories about his time as a news reporter that he's going to share with us, but we're going to keep that for a separate episode. And this week, we're just going to concentrate on 2023. Now, I'm sure, Jonathan, you started, like most of us, enthusiastic about travel in 2022. We thought restrictions are lifting. It's finally going to go back to how it was in 2019, when traveling had its odd little hiccup, but generally it wasn't full of stress. Unfortunately, we were soon having a rude awakening as 2022 descended into chaos, with airlines and airports struggling to cope with the volume of passengers as we all tried to get those holidays we've missed during COVID. There were piles of baggage everywhere, there were long queues and multiple cancellations across many airlines. So, Jonathan, do you think we will see a return to the chaos we saw in 2022 this summer, or do you think that's behind us now and in this year we're going to see an improvement?
Well, I think certainly it's great, isn't it, to travel again without having to worry about filling all those dreadful forms, about having to do tests before you leave, tests when you're there before you come back. And, the last few trips I've done where all that has gone have been such a relief, and it's been so nice not having to do any of that. But as you say, the baggage issue is still really one that we're struggling with. We've seen more pictures recently on the news, haven't we, of the bags piled up at Heathrow, and that's all pretty depressing. And I think that may well take time to sort out, because staffing levels are a real issue. So let's hope things improve in there. I'd also like technology to improve as well. It's still frustrating that some of the airline apps and websites aren't as slick and as good as they could be, and frankly should be, given the amount of money that we're spending on flights. And flights, certainly I've noticed, have gone up in price, and I can't see that reversing anytime soon. It certainly feels like it's getting more expensive to fly. It also feels like your air mile points, your Avios or whatever it might be that you use, aren't taking you quite as far as they used to, as airlines sort of reevaluate that. So that is all quite miserable. What is more positive, I think, is that airports seem to be spending money again on refurbishments, and we've seen a few lounges improve recently. I know you were out in New York recently, and they've done a lot of work there, but other airports too seem to be upping their game a little bit and realizing that they need to compete with airports that have already made big improvements in the Middle East and the like. So that's a good sign. And I think also, away from aviation, hotels need to up their game as well. I think, some of the prices hotels are charging. I was in New York recently, and the prices are unbelievable as they're trying to sort of catch up after the pandemic. But the service isn't always great. Why does it still take so long in the 21st century to check in to a hotel? I mean, that's one of my bugbears as a frequent traveller, how long that takes. And I'm sure with all the technology that's around today, it should be it should be quicker. And also things like not having a USB port by your bed. Still, you've got to fumble around on the other side of the room to charge your phone. I mean, these are little things that make for me as a frequent traveller, make a big difference. So I have got high hopes for 2023, but I do think there's a long way to go, and there's a lot of problems to iron out, which are going to take quite a while.
Yeah, I totally agree with all those points. Hotels in particular are charging higher prices than I've ever known it, and yet the service is far worse. I think that the hotel check-ins are a really good point, because it's not something I've necessarily considered. But when you think about it, with online check-in for airlines, you can actually check into a flight quicker than you can check into a hotel, which just seems absolutely crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I know some hotels are experimenting now with door keys on your mobile phone.
Yes.
That's a great idea, isn't it? So actually you don't really even need to see anybody at front desk. You can go straight to your room, as long as your phone's not flat.
Yes, yeah, Marriott are particularly good for doing the online check-in, though the problem is, I think in a lot of countries there are a requirement to see your ID, and somehow they haven't got round that problem. Why you can't upload it, I have no idea, because you can do that with an airline with certain things. You can upload all your information before. So yeah, I think hotels have got a lot of catching up to do, but it'd be interesting to see where it goes. I was certainly told by a sales manager at one of the top luxury hotels in London that they don't believe that the prices at this level are sustainable. I think part of the issue is probably for London is to do with the dollar rate, because obviously for Americans coming over here it's super cheap, so they can afford to pay those prices. But yeah, New York is one of those cities where if you haven't been before, it's generally super expensive, but the hotel rooms are generally very disappointing, I find. So we've talked a bit about what you're hoping for 2023 in terms of improvements. What are your personal travel plans? Is there any way you've already got planned, or things that you really would like to do in 2023?
Well, the funny thing about my job as a journalist and as a news presenter is that I never know where I'm going to end up, and there have been so many occasions over the years where I've had to phone my wife. She assumed I was coming home at sort of 6 or 7 in the evening, and I'd phone from Heathrow and say, I said I was going to be home. Well, actually, I'm about to get on a plane to New York or to Sydney because there's been bushfires or a terror attack or whatever it is. I remember when I was a kid, I used to fantasize about spinning a globe, stopping it with my finger in the middle of nowhere and wondering what it would be like to go there. And my job is a bit like that, because you never know. You might get a phone call in the morning saying there's been a big news event in X, you need to go now. So things like do you remember the Chile miners when they were all stuck underground? So I went and covered that story, and it was in the middle of the Atacama Desert in Chile, in the most beautiful place, but you would never choose to go there because there is nothing there. But I spent a week in the desert there in a camper van. Or I've been to Kiribati, which is a tiny island in the middle of the South Pacific that is struggling with climate change because the sea levels are rising and land is being taken over by the water. So that's an amazing trip. So I never quite know where I'm going to end up. Somewhere I'd love to go is Ukraine. I'd love to go and report on the terrible events out there. And we've had a crew in Ukraine right from the very start, and they've rotated people in and out. And as we approach the first anniversary of the war, it would be good to go there and see for myself on the ground what's happening. But in terms of personal travel, I'm hoping to go to Croatia in the summer. I haven't been there for about 20 years, and I always hear great things from people who've been on holiday to Croatia, and I know that the family would love that. We've got a holiday planned in Austria that's been postponed twice now because of COVID. We're going to Erbergurgel, which actually is a great value resort, and it's great for beginners like my kids and for people who are a bit more experienced like me. So we'll try that as well. And then I'm hoping to maybe get to Indonesia as well, perhaps have a break with my wife for a few days in Langkawi, which is somewhere I've always wanted to go to as well. So lots of plans. Let's keep our fingers crossed that some of that happen.
Hopefully we can find some good deals for you to allow you to go on all those great sounding holidays.
Yes, I check the email every morning, Michelle. You'll be glad to know. I find myself lying in bed. My alarm goes off. I'm lying in bed looking at my phone, and then I find myself reading your tips or reviews, and I'm suddenly like, what am I doing? I'm going to be late. I've got to get up. I've stopped reading the latest about Avios or some review of some fancy hotel you've been in, Michelle, honestly. But yes, I will definitely keep monitoring.
Thank you. So, as a final question, I want to just look a bit further forward. Is there anything that doesn't exist now, we think is kind of on the horizon for the future that you're really looking forward to? Me personally, I'm hoping that Boom managed to bring back supersonic travel, because I never managed to do Concorde. What do you think the future holds in store?
Yeah, the Boom thing's amazing, isn't it? It's really fascinating. I was reading in the last couple of days that they've signed a deal with an engine manufacturer, which is good news, because I'm slightly sceptical about whether there is the market for supersonic travel. I mean, there was a reason that Concorde finished, wasn't it? And I think. For me, I lived in Australia for 4 years. I was a foreign correspondent based in Sydney, and the idea of being able to fly to Australia in like 4 hours would be amazing. But I think we are still a long way off from that. I'm also quite excited about more environmentally friendly travel. I do have a bit of an issue with all this flying that we're doing still and the amount of damage it's doing to the environment. And if we can get electric planes working, or hydrogen fueled planes, aviation aircraft have managed to get the Alice, I think it's called, isn't it? That small electric commuter plane to fly for a few minutes very successfully, and they're doing great work, I think. And there are also a lot of projects looking into greener fuels, using sort of hydrogen cell technology as well. I think Airbus, am I right in saying, have managed to do some pretty extensive work on that. So I'm looking forward to all of that.
Well, I totally agree about the environmental concerns. I think it's something that all frequent travellers, no matter how you feel about the environment, that it does weigh on your mind. But there's some great initiatives coming up. I see Virgin's being given the go ahead by the government to run a fully SAF fuel flight soon, so that would be great to see. Moving on from the environment, what other things in terms of technology do you think we've got in the future, or would you like to see?
Yeah, I think there's still a huge amount of improvement that can be done to airline websites and mobile apps. I still find it incredible that in this day and age, it can be so frustrating to book flights, either using points or paying cash. I won't say which airline, but it's one of the major global airlines. I was on their app yesterday, and the amount of frustration I had just trying to look into the option for air mile flights to, I think it was to Asia. It was unbelievable. In the end, I just got so frustrated, I sort of gave up. But it shouldn't be like that, should it, in this day and age? And again, I think that there should be better ways of searching for flight options and flight routes, and things like Google Flights are brilliant. Skyscanner is brilliant as well, but I think that there can still be improvements in that area, and I think airlines need to be doing more for that. So that's for the booking process, but then also for things like checking in. Now, I love the fact that I can check in very easily on my British Airways app, and I can sail through Terminal 5. That is great when you're flying out of Heathrow in this country, but I've also had the problem in a lot of European destinations when you're coming home that you can't check in online on your mobile phone, and it just seems crazy that isn't possible, and you have to join a long queue of other tired holidaymakers all desperate to get home. So I think from a technological point of view, a huge amount can be done, and it sort of doesn't seem to be that difficult. I don't know why it's taking so long, because a lot of American airlines have brilliant systems, but we sort of seem to struggle a bit more in this country.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I think in the past we kind of thought of American airports as being a bit behind the UK, but recently my experiences there with biometrics have been great, particularly coming inbound on global entry, where you literally look at a screen for about 20 seconds and then that's it, you can walk through. So I think biometrics are definitely the way forward. I can't remember which airline, I think it was one of the Middle East ones, have introduced something as a trial where you can pretty much walk through the airport without without a passport, and British Airways as well are doing a trial on that. So definitely biometrics, I think, are the way forward. But as you said, it's quite interesting that some of European airports, let alone biometrics, they haven't even got online check-in. So yeah, I think there's a long way to go in Europe to catch up now. I think the US and the UK are starting to lead the way. But apps for me, the online check-in app, I know exactly which one you're referring to. Actually, if I have to see a message saying I have no flights and have to refresh it 10 times to see my bookings, again, I think I'm going to scream. So we can all hope for 2023 that they finally sort that out.
I suppose what I really want is the unpredictability to be taken out of traveling. You know, when you go to the airport, you never know if you're going to have a brilliant experience or a terrible experience. And a bit like on the plane as well. You know, sometimes you have a great time and everything goes smoothly. You land on time or even early. Your bags are there. The staff are great. You have a really good in-flight experience, and other times it can be dreadful. It's so unpredictable, and it would be lovely, wouldn't it, if you knew that every time you went to an airport and got a plane, it would be fairly smooth going. Obviously the odd hiccup, but at the moment it feels like it's 50-50.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, you know, pre-pandemic, yes, you're always going to get days where something goes wrong, there's snow or weather or, you know, baggage system breaks. And I think most frequent travellers accept that. But when it's just, completely random and so frequent, it just becomes very wearing. And I have to say, it did put me a bit off travelling in 2022. So I'm definitely hoping things improve because, if you travel business class or first class, you're paying that extra money not to have that hassle. And yet it still seems that even in December, we're still seeing, issues with baggage and queues, and it really shouldn't be like that. They've had a year to recover now, so we can only hope that next year, 2023, brings a big improvement. Yeah,
and it's always someone else's fault, isn't it? You know, the airlines will blame the airport will blame the government will blame everybody, and we sort of go around in this miserable circle. Yeah, absolutely. But interesting, as we said earlier, the US actually, in my experiences in the US, have all been without any real issues. So it's obviously possible to recover. Just some people are a bit slower than others. Yeah, well, let's keep our fingers crossed for the new year. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Jonathan. And as I mentioned before, we'll be running your full interview in the coming weeks. Great, and thank you very much, Michelle, for inviting me. It's been a pleasure, and best of luck with the new show. And I'll be looking forward to all your emails and all the good work you're doing over the next year as well. Thank you. Thanks. So my next guest today is Paul Charles, who may look slightly familiar to you. He's from the PC agency that was voted the most influential travel consultancy many years running, but you probably recognise him from COVID times because he appeared on many of the news programmes talking about restrictions and what the government might do next, which was pretty hard to predict. So thank you, Paul, for joining me today.
It's a real pleasure to be with you, Michelle. Thank you for having me on.
It's kind of weird talking to you because you look so familiar, having seen you on TV and followed you on Twitter for quite a long time.
They say I've got a good face for radio.
Hopefully they don't say that about me, but we'll find out.
I'm sure not.
So I thought we'd talk a bit about what happened last year, well, this year still, but people watching it, it'll be in 2022, and then talk about how you see 2023, whether it's going to be the same or whether we can look for some improvements. So in 2022, my view was we were all full of optimism at the start. We thought, this is it, restrictions are going, we're finally going to be able to travel, it will all be wonderful. And actually the reality was, yes, we could travel, but it wasn't wonderful. Airports kind of fell apart, there weren't enough staff, hotels had similar problems, and yeah, it was a difficult year for travel, and it was also extremely expensive compared with what we were used to, even pre-COVID, not necessarily during it, which was bargain basement. So how did you view the year, and what do you think 2023 is going to bring?
You definitely had two very different paths to 2022, the first half being much more unpredictable because so many countries were still coming out of COVID restrictions. And put yourself in the place of a CEO of an airline. Why would you take decisions about reopening when governments around you were not giving you plenty of information about when they themselves were going to open up? So you were only going to take decisions about hiring staff, putting fleet back in the air at a time when you knew for certain that those countries were going to open up. And that could only have been done at the very last minute. So for airlines, it's perhaps understandable why they were going to have a lot of teething issues, or more than teething issues, in the first part of 2022 as countries opened up post-COVID. Then, of course, they were to some extent caught on the hop. They couldn't cope because they didn't have enough staff. So the demand was starting to emerge from April 2022 onwards. We were seeing a lot of consumers immediately wanting to fly and travel, both for business, which came back faster than most expected, and leisure. And as a result, the airlines just couldn't put back the capacity they wanted to or deliver on that capacity. So they had to cap their capacity. The airlines, of course, had to cap the number of flights departing and arriving. And you had enormous frustration building up over the summer due to a lack of staff within the sector. So it was a very frustrating period. But then, of course, airlines started to find more staff. They were getting licenses reissued. Staff were being put back with their security tags as governments checked them more effectively. And you saw airlines starting to increase prices amid high inflation and put back more of their fleet and get them back in the air. And then you had greater profitability towards the end of the year. So it was a much rosier end to 2022 than it was at the start.
And what do you think is going to happen in 2023 then? Are we going to see more of the same? Because obviously Heathrow themselves have said that it's going to probably take them till the end of 23 to get fully staffed compared with pre-COVID. Do you think that's going to be the same for airlines? How do you think it's going to pan out?
Some airlines are definitely in a better position than others. They are quite happy operating at 70% capacity compared to pre-COVID, because they've taken the decision to raise prices, yield manage very heavily on the 70% they are operating. And of course, they're not recruiting as many staff, they're not hiring as many people. So their costs are lower as a result, even though fuel is very high. So they're in a very interesting position at the moment, the bosses of airlines. Do they go back to 100% of capacity in 2023? Or do they continue being pretty profitable with fewer staff and higher seat prices and fewer planes in the air? It's a very interesting challenge for them. And talking to CEOs, they do want to increase their capacity again. They do want to continue hiring, and they want to try and maintain the high level of pricing they're seeing at the moment, because the demand is there at the moment. So I think you'll see in 23 demand continuing to be pretty strong. Certainly through until the summer period anyway, as far as we can see, and forward bookings are showing that. You'll see capacity continue to increase, and airlines will get back to 100%. Most CEOs you talk to say they want to get back to 100%. And you'll see continued hiring, albeit at higher salaries in this high inflation world, through 2023. So I think a more positive year. And in fact, IATA are predicting higher profitability next year. That, of course, all against the backdrop of what happens in Ukraine, geopolitical tensions that we may see flare further involving China, the US and Russia. But as far as things are predictable, we can predict a more profitable year, and the forward bookings are showing that.
How do you think your airline CEOs that you've spoken to are feeling about the cost of living crisis? Because there's definitely some underlying worry amongst the industry that people are booked up already for the first half of 23, but probably bookings might slow because of the high pricing and people beginning to feel the bite of the cost of living.
I think that airlines are definitely feeling a dampening in demand in economy cabins and to some extent premium economy as well. They're seeing the mass market respond to higher inflation by slightly lower demand. However, in the front end, you're still seeing very strong demand from premium travelers, leisure travelers who just have more money. They've done well out of stock markets, perhaps, or other investments. You are seeing some reduced booking from tech companies and the tech sector as they cut back a little. And of course, the tech sector have really driven a lot of the growth at the front end of the plane in recent years. but there still seems to be enough demand for those premium cabins, albeit at those much higher prices. We're seeing prices of 20% to 30% more than we're used to due to higher inflation and airlines trying to claw back their own higher costs due to higher fuel prices. So the front end continues to perhaps confound expectations during a cost of living crisis. And we're still seeing premium cabins very full, even if some of them are taken up by frequent travelers using their points. But overall, airlines are still seeing enough demand for the front of the plane and enough demand at the back, even if the demand at the back is reducing a little. And I think that's what will focus their minds over the next few weeks as they introduce great deals to pump prime economy and make sure economy is still pretty successful.
So I'd kind of agree with all that, though I think what I'm seeing from my readers actually is definitely a little bit of a slowing in the business class, mainly because I think readers of Turning Left for Less want to get a good deal. That's what we're all about. It's champagne travel on a Prosecco budget, how to get the best deals, and there just aren't great deals at the moment. So I've definitely seen in the last few months a slacking off of bookings. I think people are still waiting for that great bargain to come. Though I think the sales at the beginning of 23 and the sort of Boxing Day sales have been a bit better, so fingers crossed that prices will start to lower, or at least we'll have a few good offers, because it's difficult for more the leisure travellers that perhaps want to do a few trips in a year rather than just one big trip and spend it all on that.
Yeah, I think we're seeing habits change a little, especially out of the UK at the moment, and perhaps in wider Europe as well, in that we are seeing some element of the whole sustainability argument feed through to consumers. And they are changing their plans, so they are taking perhaps fewer trips, but longer ones. So they might go for 2 weeks rather than 1 week on a summer holiday. They might take one longer long-haul trip, so they maximize where they're going, rather than a short-haul trip. So I think there's still a bit of that changing of habits going on, although those of us who've been in the industry some time know that when sustainability starts to hit its peak is during the good times. And when you're in a recession, sustainability issues start to disappear and aren't top of mind for consumers. What is top of mind is price. And it's always been the way in the aviation industry generally. Price will determine whether someone flies with you or not whether you're reducing 5 tons off your fleet in terms of lighter planes. So price is the king. It's always going to be king. And consumers will fly based on what you're offering them.
And then I think the other trend that we saw in 2022 was the workation, as they're calling it, because so many more people can work from home. So in effect, they can work from anywhere. People are kind of taking a longer holiday, as you said, but also working whilst they're there and then spending, obviously, their free time enjoying the destination. Do you think this is going to continue? Because I'm guessing with the rail strikes, more people have probably been working at home than we expected at this point.
Yes, I mean, the rail industry is in a right old state. The infrastructure is creaking due to lack of investment. The strikes are taking their toll in terms of consumer confidence, consumers choosing to work from home more because their employers will let them have more flexibility. And that flexibility is feeding through to how consumers behave in aviation as well. They are certainly looking at whether they can extend their holidays and work from somewhere for a week or two longer rather than go back to the office. The flexibility means the traditional airline booking patterns are starting to change just a little bit in terms of what the shoulder periods are and what the peak periods are, because actually consumers could now move around more freely outside of those peak periods. And that's quite interesting from a yield management point of view for an airline, I think, and very exciting, actually. It offers a lot of opportunities. But yes, the strikes that we're seeing also with Border Force, which so far at time of talking have had very little impact, have also dampened demand a little bit, and the threat of the strikes have obviously put people off. The fact that they haven't had any impact at our major airports, our 6 major airports, who are affected by those union strikes, means that consumers might be more confident to book actually in future, even if there are more strike dates set in the new year, which there will be for 23. I think we're going to have a bumpy January, February. There will be more strikes across the UK. and potentially in other European countries as well, as people fight for higher salaries during a high inflation period. But then things will settle down. So it may be a little bit bumpy in that first 8 to 10 weeks or so. But airlines, obviously, as you know, are looking forward to the summer period, and that's still looking strong.
That's good, and I think it's really positive that the airports have managed to cope during the strikes, and I've seen no reports of any long queues, which is great. Some people actually reported that it was better during the strikes, which is quite ironic. But
well, and also, I think you might see the UK government rethinking whether they use military more often to process arriving passengers in a very basic, simple way. Obviously, there's a lot of expertise in border force that you don't want to see removed, but we already see the military used in airports in Spain and Italy and France from time to time. So maybe the UK government will think, maybe we should, cut our costs with border force and use the military more often. And I think in a way it reassures arriving passengers as well when they see military officials checking things in a funny sort of way.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's I think the whole sort of uniform and the way we respect the military, definitely it gives you a sense that everything's working as it should be.
That's right, even if it's not behind the scenes.
Absolutely. So I thought we'd kind of move on now from being quite general about 23 and talk more about the brands that you represent with the PC agency. So you're one of the largest PR agencies in terms of travel, I believe. So if you could talk a little bit about the brands that you represent and what they have got coming up in the next year.
I have a great team. It's very kind of you to say about the agency. I couldn't do my job without them. They're fantastic at their work. Some of them work in-house or worked in-house in airlines. Some worked in-house in hotels. We have 35 people in the team. So it's a pretty big team, and we represent airlines, luxury hotels, tourism boards, cruise lines, tour operators, and we also advise governments around the world. And that mix is very important because the travel industry relies on the synergies between them. Airlines need hotels, hotels need tour operators need destinations to be promoting that destination. So they all work and gel together really well. Some of our clients, especially in the aviation space, are fantastic airlines like Finnair, Aer Lingus, TAP Portugal, Rwandair, who are growing in Africa. And all of them have quite unique networks. TAP, very strong, of course, flying to South America, for example, from Portugal. Aer Lingus, very strong on transatlantic into America, and often much better value than flying non-stop from London. You're better off going via Dublin, where you not only pay a better value price, but you also clear US customs more seamlessly and arrive on the domestic side when you arrive in the US. Finnair, very strong into Asia, obviously have been slightly pushed back, of course, by war in Ukraine and Russian airspace issues, but still have a very strong business model and a great new business class that we launched earlier this year. Rwandair has great opportunity to become a hub in Kigali, a proper hub as they build a new airport there for Africa and take on Addis Ababa, for example, as a future hub. So each of them has their own strong network that we promote very strongly. And we also represent clients like Cirium, who are very strong on data and aviation data, and they're really good, and they advise most airlines in the world on key aspects of the aviation industry. For example, they know everything about a plane, its engines, its A checks and C checks, its back history, and that's vital data for airlines and, of course, sometimes for airports and for governments as they plan their next 30-year strategy. So we've got some great clients in the aviation space. We love working with them. I'm sure we'll be working with some new clients in 2023 who I've not mentioned, but to me, our pipeline is strong, and that's very encouraging and a sign of our great teamwork. So
I personally love Finnair. I'm a bit of a Finnair fangirl, because I mean, it fits really well with my readership as well, because they're One World. So a high percentage of my readership either have status in One World or want it. So it's great they're part of One World. And we always Qatar used to kind of be the favourite airline of frequent travellers that wanted a good deal, but that kind of has gone out of the window because their prices are higher, in fact, than a lot of other airlines. Whereas Finnair are kind of filling that gap in that they're great value, some really good deals, but they also have a fantastic product. Have they got anything new planned? I see they've just taken on a new route to, is it Osaka? And they're also increasing frequency to a few places. Is there anything specific we can look forward to with Finnair in 2023?
Well, of course, Finnair is very much still in the throes of celebrating its 100 years of operations. And so you're going to hear a lot more about that in 2023. They're still obviously bedding in, no pun intended, their business class new flat bed and the fantastic seat. It's such a good product. It's I think the only business class in the world where there's no push button mechanism to move the seat down, because of course you move within the seat. That's the whole clever design ethos from the head of design, David, and his team. And Finnair, I'm sure, will be expanding further in the US next year. It wouldn't surprise me if in 2023 we see further movement of Finnair shifting its fleet around into the US, which is very popular between Helsinki and the US. But hopefully we'll see continued expansion back into Asia, of course, as it rebuilds that network. But Topi Manor, who's one of the best airline CEOs, in my opinion, and a delight to work with, he has had his work cut out. He's had a tough few years with COVID, with Ukraine and Russian airspace issues. So he's having to piece back the network, slim the size of the network, and then put it back together again. And he's done a very good job at that, I think. So I think Finnair, you'll continue to see great pricing. One of the reasons I love Finnair, like you, Michelle, is that I love, on my exec club points, going somewhere like Delhi, not flying non-stop from London, but actually going via Helsinki and then Helsinki to Delhi and gaining more points as a result. And the journey itself, even with the transit stop, is only about an hour and a half more. And I love doing that. And I love flying on Finnair as a product. So it's great for those who are keen on building their points as well as getting great value on their flight.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I did a trip in, I think it was November or October, that was with Finnair and yourselves, and it was interesting actually to stop over and see Helsinki, because I'll be honest, I've flown through it quite a few times. I've never got further than the Hilton Helsinki airport. So I did actually go into the centre, and I would really recommend people, if you get a chance to add in a stopover, definitely do it, because Helsinki is really beautiful. I wasn't expecting that. It was a great short break. It's
beautiful, Helsinki, and in fact wider Finland is fantastic. If you get a chance to go up to Ivalo in the far north and Lapland or Rovaniemi in the winter, they're fantastic places to be. Go on a sauna on a lake in the winter. That's something worth doing. It's a beautiful country and very much underexplored, certainly by the British market. So yes, I'd recommend it.
Absolutely. So I thought we'd kind of wrap up, because we've kind of been talking about our own personal travel preferences. So what do you have planned for 2023, if anything, or is there the things that you're kind of thinking about doing? What's your year looking like for your personal and maybe professional travel?
Well, I think from a PC agency point of view, we'll continue to grow bit by bit. We'll have some new team members joining us in January. We have more clients due to start with us in the new year. And so you'll see the PC agency continuing to grow, and especially in terms of our insight as well, and the data that we produce for consumers and for clients. And we'll make more of an impact, I think, globally rather than just in the UK, as we expand further with some of our team wanting to work overseas more often and give them those experiences. From a personal point of view, I love this industry. I love the sector. I love the people I work with and get a chance to meet within it. And I think once you're in the travel industry, you stay in it more often than not, because it's such a gluey, sticky sector to be in, because actually it is a little bit unpredictable and it's not your day-to-day job at all. I don't see it as a job. I see it as a hobby working in this sector. So whilst I'm also growing the business, I'll continue to travel a lot. On average, I travel every other week. I've got holidays booked in France and Italy next year. I'm due to travel to South Africa in April for a meeting or two, or a few meetings actually down there. We represent Rwanda, as I've said, so I'm sure I'll be in Rwanda a couple of times during the year. The WTTC summit is in Rwanda next year, so I look forward to that. And I want to visit countries that I've never visited before. I've visited 92 countries so far in the world, according to some app I'm using. So I want to get up to about 120 next year, maybe, as I head towards the magic number of 200 the 200 countries or so in the world. So I'd love to get up there by the end of my career, but there's a long time to go yet before I finish my career, I hope.
Wow, that's an impressive number of countries. I thought I was doing well, about 67, I think I'm up to, but I'm the same. I always try and do a new country every year, at least one, ideally a couple more. It's nice to try new things.
Yeah, really important. And also that's the whole point we're in this sector, is to meet people, it's to understand their way of living, their habits, trends taking place in that country. I mean, who'd have thought Rwanda, for example, now would be as open as it is today compared with 20 years ago? It's a very different place. So it's great to see some of those countries change as well. And so that's why it's important to go back to some of the places you previously visited.
Yeah, absolutely. I do that as well. Quite often go back because you can never really see everything in one go. And if you do, you just spend the whole time rushing around. So it's nice to go back a few times and see everything. And as you said, how things change. When you think about some cities, even like Singapore, how that's changed in the last 20 years. It's, you see a difference every time you go.
Yeah. And also, I'm a great fan of the Caribbean, and we represent Grenada in the Caribbean. And it's a beautiful island. Any excuse to go back there and see that develop. I love seeing those small islands improve, develop, increase their airlift, of course, attract more frequency. It's really exciting part of the world.
Oh, well, if ever you need anyone to promote Grenada, I can think of someone who'd be perfect.
Add you in my suitcase next time I go.
Well, it's been really great talking to you today, Paul, and wish you every success with your agency in 2023.
Thank you. That's very kind. Thank you for having me on, and good luck to everyone watching in 2023. I hope you have a successful year.
Well, my final guest, you may not necessarily know as something of an aviation geek. Andi Peters actually hosted 3 days of Plane Spotting Live a few years ago, but he's most commonly known from the Broom Cupboard as a children's TV presenter early in his career. But nowadays, you're more likely to see him on daytime TV with Good Morning Britain, This Morning, Lorraine, and even Loose Women amongst his credits. I'd like to ask Andi a couple of questions about how he views the future in 2023. So I asked him, what did he think would happen in terms of the queues and the chaos we saw last year? Would that continue this year? And also, does he have any particular plans or hopes for travel in 2023? Over to you, Andi.
I think travel in 2023 is actually going to end up being quite chaotic. We're already seeing loads of countries changing their rules, trying to protect themselves from COVID once again, which I think is the right thing to do. The most difficult thing is you never know what's the right thing to do for each country, and keeping up to date with those things can be really difficult. The advent of the brand new scanners will hopefully make travel easier. I know that they're already being used. I travelled through Bahrain the other day. It was amazing. You just literally leave everything in and there's nobody there, but it's all scanned. That would be great. It'd be great to see the UK lead the way in some of this technology. We never seem to, certainly at Heathrow Airport, we seem to be the last to get all the new technology, which is a real shame. But I think the numbers are going to go up, the numbers are going to continue to grow. The prices are astronomical at the moment for travel. I don't know why. Maybe those will come down, and maybe we'll start seeing more bargains all over the place.
So I also asked Andi what his personal travel plans were in 2023.
Last year, I took 74 flights in a year, which is kind of the lowest number I've done for the last 10 years. However, this year, already off to a good start. I'm here in Cairo. Can't see much because it's quite hazy. And also I've been to Dubai. I'm going to go to Hawaii and lots of places actually. So I think this year will be a great year for travel. Just remember what you're doing. Check all the COVID restrictions. I also say always take a mask because you never know when you might need it.
Well, that's the end of the first ever episode of This Week in Travel, brought to you by Turning Left for Less. I'd like to say a special thank you to all my celebrity guests this week who've talked about their thoughts on what 2023 has in store. If you'd like to join us again, we'll be here again this time next week. Until then, happy travels.